Welcome to Drawing 1, Observational Sketching. Before we get started, I do need to let you know that this actually isn't a 4-week course. This is a 4,171-week course, which is 80 years, give or take a few years when you didn't quite start sketching or drawing yet when you were too young to hold a pencil. What I mean by this is that sketching, doodling, and their older cousin drawing were probably some of the first skills that you ever did when you were a toddler. And they are absolutely critical early skills to develop hand-eye coordination. Now, it's interesting how we distinguish hand-eye coordination because what it typically implies is that the hand is the lesser of the two and the eye is the master, and the hand is constantly just trying to catch up to what the eye actually observes. The eye has the objective reality and the hand is just doing as best as it can what the eye sees. It's especially interesting to consider this while reading Harold Speed's The Practice and Science of Drawing, which was written a long time ago, over 100 years ago in fact. And here's a quote from the book. "Beautiful things seem to put us in correspondence with a world the harmonies of which are more perfect and bring a deeper peace than this imperfect life seems capable of yielding of itself. Our moments of peace are, I think, always associated with some form of beauty, of this spark of harmony within corresponding with some infinite source without. Like a mariner's compass, we are restless until we find repose in this one direction. In moments of beauty, for beauty is, strictly speaking, a state of mind rather than an attribute of certain objects, although certain things have the power of inducing it more than others, we seem to get a glimpse of this deeper truth behind the things of sense. And who can say but that this sense, dull enough in most of us, is not an echo of a greater harmony existing somewhere the other side of things, that we dimly feel through them, evasive though it is." What I gather from this quote is that we're not simply duplicating what we see, we are infusing it with our own flair, or a bit of personality, or a story, self-contained though it is. Rather than our hands simply duplicating or replicating what our eye sees, we want to bring these two elements that we have in harmony with each other. We want to have them be less separated and working in tune with each other, speaking to each other in a dialogue rather than one dominating the other. The more in harmony our hand drawing is with our eye, and also infused in there is our ability to decide what aspects that we see are created in our drawing, the more that we improve our ability to depict the illusion of life, which is a term coined by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, two early Disney animators that were masters of their craft. On a more practical level, as an animator or illustrator, you don't always have reference images available to draw from on hand. So the more that we can train our inner sight or our sense of remembering the images that we sketch, the better. And that's where this course comes in. Observational sketching is going to help you to train your inner sight, your inner visual library. And then it becomes easier and easier to extract that from your mind when you don't have an image reference in front of you, when you're just drawing from your own imagination. Now, the catch of this, of course, is that as time goes on, that image in your mind starts to fade, and as does your ability to actually sketch that thing that you had drawn once. So this is why you need to keep a very active sketching practice to keep a very rich image library in your brain. Now, the great thing about sketching as well is that the more you sketch and the more different forms you depict, the more you're kind of just able to become comfortable with drawing forms generally, regardless of the complexity of them. And then, even if you don't remember exactly how to draw that specific car, your mind is just better at filling in the gaps and making it believable and plausible, even without the exactness of that reference on hand. Now, Plato said that artists and poets are just imitators. They're not really the real thing. And I really believe that. We are not, if you're, just because you can design or draw a chair or a couch, that doesn't mean that you can build that thing. It means that you are imitating what the real thing is like in life. But if you're an active sketcher, you can learn to draw things so accurately that you will convince a carpenter that you know how it's built. Now that is a great point to get to in your artistic practice. And the more comfortable you get at drawing a variety of different forms, the more you're able to guess further afield at how other forms might exist as well. And I'm not saying that, everything is an equal amount of difficulty when you're sketching and drawing. Obviously, there are some things that are far more difficult to draw than others, but by training your brain to understand form, and form is basically our ability to interpret a three-dimensional object or person or place onto our two-dimensional paper and convince others that that is a three-dimensional thing. That is essentially what form is. The more comfortable you get at drawing forms, the more you're able to just create things from your imagination. And in animation in particular, that is of utmost importance. This is why so many teachers emphasize doing so much figure drawing, because the human figure is an incredibly complex form that is infinitely changeable and can create so many different shapes and has a huge expressive capability as well. Getting really good at drawing the human body is going to help you draw trees, and being able to draw your dog is going to help you draw airplanes, and drawing a car will help you draw a cathedral. So the underlying thread through all of this is to draw, and draw some more. And over time, everything becomes easier because you understand form generally. Form is the bedrock of drawing that you're going to build on top of. The more complexity, the more texture, it doesn't matter. You will be able to interpret those forms and find the best way to render that, even in simplified format. And honestly, this is the best thing about sketching. It just gets you so competent that all the other aspects of drawing and design start to improve at the same time. When you're just starting to sketch, you might not be able to feel as comfortable diving right into the both defining the form and rendering that form at the same time. So what I'm going to recommend is that you kind of break the subject down by the different parts that kind of make them up. So on this character, in this example, I'm going to break this down similar to how we would break down a character design in animation, which is by all these different parts that I'm noticing that kind of make up the overall form. So I'm constantly measuring things as I draw here. I'm looking at the angle. I'm also looking at the width of one area to the next. This might have been exaggerated a little bit. And now that I've got this arm here, which is I guess you could say of this figure, this is the part that's closest to us, though marginally. From here, it's easiest to do this first because it kind of determines how much space there is on either side here. So when I'm drawing, I often refer to the X, Y, and Z axes. So the X axis is basically left and right. The Y axis is up and down. And then the Z is a little more difficult to determine, but it's basically going to and coming from. So it's the depth, basically. And as you're turning your character or person, if you're doing a character rotation or something, you'll find that obviously these are going to change. Right now, this is the case. So when I'm talking about how much space is after her arm and between her back, I'm talking about this is an X axis consideration, right? Because we're not talking about how tall she is. We're just talking about the amount of space here, and how that space is distributed. So she's wearing a dress, but nonetheless, I can kind of draw the forms that I see here, and there's some actual little parts where the dress is kind of contorting. So this is all just ground, so I'm not going to go too deep into the detailing of this, but I'll draw a little bit of it. And we should actually clarify that now because we don't see this hand really at all. So there's some plants here, but not a whole lot. And I'm just going to do a very quick gestural sort of approach to drawing this foliage and ground. I really like working with texture, but that's not really what I'm focusing on here. I'm focusing on the figure. So it's also okay when you're sketching to isolate to the things that you actually are focusing on. You don't need to get everything in here. We don't need to render this whole image. Okay, so now that I have these two areas, now I want to think, okay, let's do another x-axis kind of measurement here. So maybe from this arm out to here, and the dress, again, it creates another fold down here, maybe another one even. The chest, and then it might also be good to begin kind of considering the actual dress itself and how it kind of impacts the figure and how much skin we're seeing versus dress. See that? I almost measured that wrong. It's really just a tight little area here of that sort of chest neckline. It's very minor. So again, I'm going to pretend that I haven't drawn very much, and I'm just going to break everything down by the actual shapes. Doing my best job of kind of getting the volumes right. So now that I have the neck approximately, and I can look at the arm and then look at the neck and see if I'm close. So it's kind of like a gradual, you're solving all these different drawing problems, but you kind of need one before you can get to the next, right? So if I wanted to, I could even start to kind of do some of the little frilly details here, the fold, and then the back of that sleeve. And also, now that I have this, I can get her chin. I can look at the space and kind of measure out where that chin is as best as I can. It is a sketch, so, you know, sketching doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but, you know, we want to be as close as we can. Mouth. Thankfully, this is a profile, which is typically easier. Profiles are known to, because you're just dealing with the, well, the depth of her head and the height. You don't have to deal with the her x-axis, I guess. It's nice to contrast, when you have a model that's mostly curves, it's nice to contrast the odd straight line in there, even if it requires you to kind of exaggerate slightly to achieve that. A mixture of curves and straights is kind of, yeah, it's just ideal to have a diverse kind of shape range and rendering. So now, I mean, the hair, it's so light in some areas and much denser in others. So I'm just going to kind of approximate this. I also actually, now that before I do that, I'm going to get her whole head volume in first. So it's something like that, which means her ear would be somewhere back here, but we're not going to see that. So I'm just going to get the hair in now, and her part is sort of over here. And then now we have some kind of falling hair here too. So I'll get some of that. I don't need to get all of it in perfect detail. I just need to get the essence of it. That's something that is super important with sketching, is not to get the literal thing exactly as it is in all of its complexity, but to be able to synthesize and kind of simplify those forms. Okay, now I'm using a bit of mass shading here. So I'm shading this shape, this shadow shape, to help it read as hair. And why that's important is to distinguish itself from the actual face so that there's a contrast. We can tell that one form is one thing, hair, and the other is the skin. So now that I've got her dress, I'm not sure if I brought this in enough, but nonetheless, I can start to get her leg. And again, so this is mostly straight, right? Because gravity is pulling this dress down. So we're not going to have a lot of, you'll notice that you're not going to see a lot of like ripples of the dress, unlike below, where we're going to see a lot more actual drapery. Drapery is the forms kind of draping from the actual leg form. So now we're going to see some of the nice dressy sort of details but not at the top often, just because of how gravity pulls it down. It's good to know for when you're kind of designing your own characters. That happens a lot, where you want to have, you know, the face of the clothing that's facing up the most as flatter than the parts that are lower down. So here, I mean, this is one of these areas where I don't want to get every perfect detail here. I just want to get the essence of this dress. So I'm just kind of I'm looking at some of these pieces, but not all of them. And I'm going to use kind of this very simplified hatching, occasionally defining the actual forms as I go in the kind of flow that they would be in. There, I did a little bit of cross hatching. This is kind of an intuitive thing that you'll probably find on your own, just like your ideal shading or hatching method. Or maybe this is too detailed and you're more after you don't want to focus as much on the dark and light. You want to focus on the actual drapery itself, which I'll do on this side, which is absolutely fine. You don't always have to include everything in every sketch, like I said. You can just kind of focus on the forms of the dress themselves, just as lines. So something like that, perhaps. And then we've got more leaves, of course, which we want to try to contrast with the figure. So now, at this part, we're actually seeing a little bit of her foot, and it's bending. So that's her ankle, and then that's her foot. Sometimes, especially when you're working from photos, it can be really hard to understand. Oh, there's a big stick there. That's unfortunate. It can be really hard to understand actually what these forms are and like which specific area you're looking at. Yeah, I get it in this case, but if you weren't as aware of anatomy, it would be maybe a little bit more confusing to understand what exactly we're seeing of that foot. And I'm guessing this is maybe the other foot here or the end of that foot. It's hard to tell. Okay, so we've now got the sort of, I guess, foreground and middle ground that is her body. Now let's get the background, aka her other arm behind. So one thing, as I measure this out, I'm going to be careful because I want to get this negative shape you see there as accurate as I can and try to get this distance, this Y distance here, as closely as I can to what I see. And I also need to see at this point, now that I've got her general location of her arm, I'm going to switch gears and actually try to get her hand, because the hand is the next dependent factor here because it actually interacts with her head. So if I get that hand in, I'll guarantee that I can just kind of connect the rest. Even if one part's a little bit off, it'll be forgiving. This is a thing that I find a lot of new artists don't do, is they'll kind of complete it one piece after the other, but I find it's much easier to kind of jump around and to complete the areas that are going to be trouble, like sometimes connecting that arm with the hand. Would be tricky. It's hard to see this hand exactly from this small image, but it's something like this. That's the gesture of the hand, at least. Okay, so now that I've got the hand and it's exactly where it should be for her head, now I can go in and get her actual arm and connect it to the next piece. So again, as I said, even if I was slightly off with one of these, now I would be able to correct it a little bit as I kind of connect it to the next piece of the body. So again, I don't see much of that. It's mostly hair. There's a little, bracelet there. Okay, so her hand is interacting with her hair, so this would be a good time to actually get some of that in. And this is where I'm going to pull a cartoon trope and kind of, heavily simplify this hair. Hair can be so complicated. But again, you mostly want to try to achieve a sense of the weight of the hair and the overall shapes, but you don't want to make it feel too solid. So this is where especially these cross contour sort of strokes or hatching strokes are going to be very helpful to define that. And I do want to create some contrast here, so this would be a good area to do some mass rendering. So getting a little of that dark and light. And it's kind of carrying through here. Very simple hatching, just up and down. And then this part looks like it's actually overlapping her arm. So again, I'm just getting the overall direction and essence of the hair, not it exactly as it is. Okay. So at this point, now I could end it here, and even honestly, if you're studying animation and you're just after the anatomy or the pose, you might not even do nearly this much detail. But, you know, I actually also want to study the general feeling of the details on her dress. So if I want to get everything I can from this sketch, I might also just give it a shot to try and actually render some of these very complicated and numerous parts of the dress just a little bit. I'm not going to do too much, but just, you know, trying to get the odd one that I can. Now it's mostly just little holes and little textural details here and there. Okay. So honestly, this isn't a bad place to leave it. It's feeling pretty complete to me. And again, this is me trying to get everything I can from this. I got a little bit of texture, got a little bit of drapery, a little bit of anatomy, and also a little bit of rendering of hair. So when you're sketching, you kind of want to think about, like, what are all the things that I want to learn from this sketch, and isolate those things. So again, like I said, I could have done a sort of simplified just anatomy breakdown if I wanted to, and that is fine. I could have even have drawn the rib cage and kind of analyzed it that way. There's a lot of different ways to analyze it, and I'm just doing, well, I'm doing several here, and that's why this is so rendered. But if you want to do more simplified sketches, that's absolutely fine too. So I hope this quick demo was helpful in kind of getting us started if you're not really sure how to begin with sketching. There's a lot of ways to sketch, and there's so many different styles. And throughout this course, we're going to feature some different artists' work to give you a sense of how other artists approach sketching as well. Okay, let's get to some drawing. Your first assignment for week 1 is to get a sketchbook, get some drawing materials, and to sketch your heart out. More specifics to follow. But first, on the topic of materials, if you are a hesitant sketcher, that is, if you tend to make shy strokes or make many strokes before committing to the final lines, I want you to use a bold medium this week, like pen or marker. If you aren't hesitant and are happy to dive in, you can use whatever you'd like except digital. In this first observational sketching course, I want you to complete the exercises traditionally, if possible. If this is difficult for you for whatever reason, such as scarce art supplies available where you live, that's fine, and using digital is fine. Anyone in the Western world should be able to find art supplies pretty readily, and it's pretty valuable to be able to sketch analog for many reasons. On a practical level, it's easier to always have your sketchbook and drawing materials in your bag. It occupies so little space, there's really no reason not to carry it around with you. Especially as an artist, I mean, come on. Okay, let's discuss some of my favorite sketching materials. Alright, this is my pencil case. It has gradually got a lot more ordered over time. It used to be chaos with everything kind of floating loose, but I now see the value in having as a pencil case where there's those bands that hold everything in place. With pens and markers, it doesn't matter so much unless you have a leaky marker or ink pen or something that could leak all over the place. It's actually more for the Conte pencils on the right. I find that you really don't want to jostle those too much, or the entire piece of Conte will break all the way up. And then when you keep sharpening it, it breaks and you sharpen it some more and it breaks. And what that basically means is that that entire piece of Conte is already broken all the way up. And you're just kind of revealing that gradually. So Conte pencils in particular are a very fickle thing. You have to be very careful with them. This is kind of a hybrid pencil case assortment that I have right now. I change this up depending on what I'm going to be doing. If I'm going to life drawing, for example, I pretty much only have Conte, Conte pencils, the X-Acto knife, and some of the erasers, and definitely the kneadable eraser, but everything else is not often there. I'll actually use the two Pentel brush pens often in life drawing too, but the thin pens aren't very practical. I mostly use this assortment for actually being out and just sketching in my sketchbook. As I said earlier, I love working with ink. It helps develop bolder brush strokes, or bolder strokes with just a felt tip ink pen. I also love these two Pentel brush pens, as I just mentioned. There's the color brush and then the pocket brush. I love that they both have refillable cartridges, although admittedly the color brush is, you kind of have to replace the entire back, which isn't super great. But as much as I can, I like to try and consider the waste that I'm using. So the fact that the pocket brush can have these little refillable cartridges that I actually have in the middle here are really, really awesome. Normally I have a Blackwing as well. I like sketching with Blackwing, but I also just use this mechanical pencil that I actually have just right attached to my little sketchbook holder here. So back to the pencil case. So those two red pencils, those are color erase pencils. They are a colored erasable pencil. A lot of animators use them because you can kind of do the lighter rough strokes with that, and then the graphite on top in in darker graphite. So, and often, honestly, I find animators just use those colored pencils in and of themselves. That's kind of it's not a means to an end. It just is the end in itself. I also occasionally like sketching, but using this gray marker as a base tone. It kind of serves the same purpose. It's kind of a gradual way to create the form first and then do the finer lines afterwards. Yeah, I often use Microns or Faber-Castell pens. Either one of those are fine. In fact, the India ink ones, the Faber-Castells, are actually waterproof as well, which is great. So if you want to use another water-based medium of any kind, watercolor, or one of these watercolor brushes, I know some people that like to do a lot of urban sketching will take these sort of empty brushes that have the space for water in their cartridge, and they actually just fill it with colored inks, and then they have a whole bunch of those. So the nice thing about that is you've kind of got like this potential colored ink ready to go without needing any actual container to hold the ink. It's just right in the back of the brush. The only thing is it can get kind of messy, so if you're going to use it, if you're going to put green ink in one or something, you kind of want to keep it to be green. You wouldn't want to change that up too much or it could get really muddy. Another big tip is to put your kneadable eraser in plastic wrap. Again, I try not to use any plastic. I'm generally, I try to be as waste free as possible. But this is just such a huge tip. Like that gum eraser will stick to everything in your pencil case. So to cover it in plastic wrap is actually such a saver, and it's very easy just to unfold that. So, and as for my sketchbook itself, this is maybe a bit stereotypical, but I love those moleskin flexible bound sketchbooks, I guess, that are just blank. And I'll take notes in them too, but I just love the feel of the paper and the pencil on them. So this is pretty much entirely what I use. And I have this nice cover that I got. It's actually handmade. And the pencil kind of fits in there as well. So that's great. So if I'm in a rush, I just grab that and I at least have that pencil to work with. So that's kind of nice to just have that attached to the sketchbook. And then I can just replace the sketchbook whenever it's full. So that's my little material overview. Okay, let's get back to the sketching. So the first thing I sketched was actually a little sort of elongated tea kettle and some flowers, some complicated flowers at that. Those big bushy ones I'm working on right now are lupins. And I don't remember what the other ones are, but that I wanted a nice variety of different forms, trying to simplify. Whenever you're dealing with something very complicated like this, a little still life, your ability to kind of simplify those forms is extremely important, and to have it still be readable as those flowers. That's really the trick. Okay, after that, I'm now working on a little cafe scene of a few people, which hopefully, if you're going to do your sketches at a cafe, you can do what in animation we call very originally cafe sketching. Cafe sketching is great. Artists really enjoy this, and honestly, you can do it anywhere. You can do it out at the airport. The airport's actually a great place to do it because you get such a great variety and diversity of different people. It's a really good cross section of society. But so one thing I want to articulate here is the difference between line rendering and mass rendering. And so in this sketch here, mass rendering is when you're creating your edges and shapes based on dark and light tones, basically, like larger shapes. And then obviously line rendering is just doing a line, just the linear. I'm doing a little combination of both. You'll see that I'm shading here and there. Just with hatching, though, it's nothing horribly complicated. And hatching is just making multiple lines. And in that case, with that cafe scene, I was mostly just doing hatching in one direction, sort of diagonally from left to right. Sometimes in this next portrait of this man, you'll see a more variety of different hatching strokes going in different directions depending on the geometry of the form or the flow of the form of the body, or his shirt, his folds. Now, there are some cases when I still default to that kind of diagonal hatching stroke, like in those little shirt ripples there. But see, when I'm drawing that shoulder, his other shoulder, you'll see that I'm actually kind of rotating my lines around in a circular way to kind of define that circular form. So sometimes I do what's called cross contour hatching, which follows the flow of the form itself. And sometimes I do, I don't know, some people call it unidirectional hatching, or just hatching is better, just single. Yeah, same with this hut that I'm drawing right now. You can see this is all, see, because I'm just focusing on those dark masses, I'm just drawing the lines in one direction, but it does change depending on the plane of the house that it's hitting. So in most cases, I'm still doing that diagonal line. On the far right face, I did just up and down hatching, but still the hatching is very basic. I'm not trying to do much more than articulate dark and light. Here, I also want to draw your attention to those little details I did on the grass and the moss, just to kind of try and get a sense of the texture. Those are super important, and you don't have to go overboard with them. I'm already spending a fair bit of time on these sketches. Your sketches might look a lot simpler from this, especially if you're working from life. They don't need to be so detailed. I did a wide variety of different kind of subjects that I want to sketch. Here I'm focusing on this older man's face. I love working with older people's faces because there's so much more structure, lines, and kind of story in their faces. And here you can really see me using the cross contour hatching strokes. So those are those little lines that flow in the direction of the form, going around the beard. See, those ones are flowing in the forehead. And articulating the different directions of the hair. And there's also a huge importance between the sort of the contour lines. Contour lines are lines around the forms, and then there's the little lines on the interior of the larger form that help to denote different geometry, different planes of the face, as well as light and dark. So these hatching strokes are doing quite a bit. Here I'm drawing another man's face. I got into an older man face tangent here, but yeah, it's all great, and I learned so much every time. His beard was very scraggly, as was his hair actually, and I really wanted to get the wrinkles on his head as well. Now, if I was drawing this from life, again, I would have simplified this so much. There's Yeah, it's really a lot of detail that I'm kind of putting in here. So yeah, and here I'm kind of doing it again just to have another crack at it. Okay, so this is just one page of sketches basically. So this first week, while you're just kind of getting comfortable, or maybe I guess sketching in a more organized way, not just sort of passively, but actually trying to learn as much as you can from the sketches that you're doing. I'm going to give you a range of different amounts of pages that I'd like you to fill each week, and also focusing on different subjects and ways of sketching. This week is the most open ended because I just want you to get a little bit more comfortable, try some new things out, or just do some sketches in the way that you're normally used to it. But generally, a nice page collage like this, you'll notice too that, a lot of these drawings are not really complete. A few of them are. I suppose the still life could be considered complete, and the little hut, the little ramshackled house there. But a lot of the other ones are just fragments, like the guy leaning in at the cafe. I didn't even bother drawing his back. I mean, also because I had the teapot there, but it's okay to also like smash your sketches together. It can make for some really nice general page layouts, and especially if you're considering if you're working towards creating your portfolio, you want your sketches and your general page layouts to be both strong in terms of your sketching and rendering ability, or your ability to simplify forms and reduce complexity. But also, you want your actual page layouts to be interesting to look at and clear. You'll notice that, I do have these collage different subjects smashed in together a little bit, but you can still easily read the different elements to this page. Nothing is just so scribbly or unclear or overlapping another drawing that you can't see what's going on. It's quite clear. I've tried to give things their own space. You can have some overlap, but you just need to make sure that it does remain quite clear. Especially because a lot of the portfolio reviewers look through personal artwork quite quickly, so they're kind of flipping through pages rather quickly because they're seeing so many portfolios, obviously. So you just want to be a little bit aware of their time when they're reviewing your work. So you want it to be, so the more clear it is, the better, basically. So, anyways, yeah, let's dive into your own sketches this week and see how you do and see what struggles come up. If you're thinking a lot while you're doing it and you have questions that brew when you're working on this, or things you'd like to improve, or just general questions about sketching, and how to kind of get the most out of your sketches in terms of what you're learning from them, then absolutely please write these questions down and we'll discuss them in our feedback session. Okay, great. Good luck, everybody. I hope you have a good first week.